Hello, role-playing people, and in this episode we're going to have a look at the oh-so-blasphemous practice and culture of Setite sorcery, which the Mesubet referred to as Akh. A quick notice before we continue: I will use some terms from the lexicon in the book, but I have never actually heard them being pronounced as they would have been pronounced originally. So if I mispronounce something, do forgive me, and as always, correct me if possible. Despite preparing for this episode quite seriously and delving at least partially into reads such as Of Isis and Osiris by Plutarch, or the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or Professor Alexandre Moret's Mysteriis Aegyptiorum, which led me to the Mysteriis Aegyptiorum by Iamblichus, and various other sources which present the beliefs and myths of ancient Egyptians, I do not wish to burden my dear listeners with conflicting factoids or minute details which, though interesting, might never come up during actual play. The aim of this episode, similar to the Koldunism, Abyss Mysticism, and Duranki episodes, is to step inside the culture and practices of Setite Lector Priests as presented in the vampire books. I've said it before and I will say it again, I don't think players should seriously read an entire shelf of books on the subject or become amateur Egyptologists just to play and portray a Setite sorcerer. However, it is without a doubt that having at least a basic understanding of ancient Egyptian myth and divine pantheon is going to be of great use. The reason for that is the following, and I'm going to quote Iamblichus really quickly from section 7, chapter 1. But I am desirous, previous to this, to unfold to you the peculiarity of the theology of the Egyptians. For they, imitating the nature of the universe and the fabricative energy of the gods, exhibit certain images through symbols of mystic, occult, and invisible intellections. Just as nature, after a certain manner, expresses invisible reasons or productive powers through visible forms. But the fabricative energy of the gods delineates the truth of forms through visible images. Hence the Egyptians, perceiving that all superior natures rejoice in the similitude to them of inferior beings, and thus wishing to fill the latter with good, through the greatest possible imitation of the former, very properly exhibit a mode of theologizing adapted to the mystic doctrine concealed in the symbols. As fancy as that sounds, the idea is very simple, and the VTM write-up does indeed reflect this idea that Setite sorcery is sympathetic magic. Similar attracts similar. As above, so below. All superior natures rejoice in the similitude to them of inferior beings, which is why, as the Blood Sacrifice book also mentions, a lot of the Setite paths or rituals involve the imitation or invocation or mention of a deity, a divine deed, or an event which occurred in a time before recorded history, a mythical time, illo tempore. Even upon a cursory glance of the Akh paths listed on the White Wolf Wiki, we can see they are named after Egyptian deities, though they are mechanically similar to some thaumaturgical paths. The path of Ptah is thus similar to the path of conjuring, as Ptah is considered a creator god, a god of craftsmen, sculptors, and architects. The valor of Sutekh is similar to the path of Mars, emphasizing Seth's ability as a warrior, and it is one of many paths related to Set, given his power over multiple domains. Even though the mechanics of Akh are quite simple, as we're about to see, the player can add a whole new level of depth to their roleplay by invoking the names of such powerful entities and their deeds, of course. So players, if possible, do brush up on your Egyptian deities. Thus, Akh is sympathetic magic, making use of imitations and symbols, but I wonder, what does the term Akh actually mean? Blood Sacrifice book tells us Egyptians had two words for magic, Heka, which means magic, and Akh, which means spells. My own research led me to the book of Professor Alexandre Moret, and he says the term Akh is pretty vague, and it is used to refer to the sacred, the glorious, and the useful. My own translation of terms into English from the Romanian edition of the Egyptian Mysteries. Furthermore, we learned that this Akh is not a static, intrinsic property of a thing, but a transferable attribute. My own translation again. When performed for the worship of a deity or the benefit of man, these rites could transfigure any man into a sacred being. Akh. They made things become sacred. Sak. Of course, the rites Professor Moret is referring to are called Seshtau, the Mysteries, which, sadly, aren't even mentioned in the vampire lore books. The Seshtau referred to very special and often reclusive rituals which would be performed outside of the normal hours dedicated to cult activities by an elite of priests and participants who understood their occult meanings. If we read a bit further ahead, we find out there are not only lector priests, but actor priests and various other types of participants involved in these ceremonies. So one thing is for sure, the vampire lore books don't really delve too deep into the actual religious practices of ancient Egyptians. But what of the lector priests? How did this caste of Setite sorcerers come to be? Well, the answer is, we don't know. While books such as Blood Magic and Blood Sacrifice detail the practices themselves, they don't share much information about the history of Hrihib, and even too many mentions of how Set himself acquired such powers initially. We know he was thrown into Duat, he battled Apep, obtaining knowledge hidden since the creation of the world upon emerging victorious and devouring the serpent's black heart. Therefore, it is plain to see how a discipline such as Serpentis reflects this myth and is in turn explained by this myth. The Setites have learned their Ophidian signature discipline because Set took knowledge and power from Apep. But what about this sorcery? Well, the revised clan book doesn't even mention the words lector priest, sadly, so I am lost. I really wish I had found a historical context to share with you now, like I had found for the Duranki episode, but the origins of Akh are shrouded in mystery. What we do know is that Set himself passed down his teachings and part of his magic in the Book of Going Forth by Night, which every lector priest copies by hand and uses in his practices and rituals. This is why they are called lector priests, Hrihib, meaning the one who carries the book. The text contained within, whether written on a leather-bound tome or a papyrus, in Coptic or Greek or English, only contains 2 rituals alongside the 9 revelations of the void, which supposedly free the soul from the chains of the aeons, making this book a blasphemous antithesis to the Book of Going Forth by Day, aka the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Well, how were the other rituals discovered and passed down? Again, we don't know for sure. We currently know of the existence of multiple grimoires, most of which pale in comparison to the Book of Thoth. But we can imagine passing down such valuable occult knowledge must have been extremely difficult given that Set was vilified and demonized by everyone not of his cult. See, he'd always been a challenger of ways and a seeker of lore, not to mention a fantastic warrior and a helpful, loyal member of the divine family. Did he not defend Ra's Sunbark against Apep every night when it passed through the gates of sunset and to the gates of dawn? But when the time came for Ra to retire, Set's brother, Osiris, took the throne through deceit and manipulation. See, in the Setites' version of events, the real version of events, adds the serpent in me, Osiris was a greedy little sneak and made sure to always get the biggest, juiciest piece of the pie, leaving barely anything for the others. But Set would not have it. He proved not only superior physical capabilities as a warrior, but he also outsmarted and tricked Osiris when he got him into the coffin he threw in the Nile. So Set clearly was the best option here, but oh no, Isis assembled Osiris's body and used magic to conceive Horus. And of course everyone can look the other way when it comes to incest and necromancy, but they cannot, for the life of them, forgive the rebel who tried removing a greedy tyrant from power, right? So the divine family, these aeons, these boot-licking, ass-kissing tools, got behind Horus and, well, threw Set into Duat, into the underworld, hell, whatever you want to call it. And Ra even cursed him to be hurt by the light of the sun should he ever get out of that abyss, because that's what any honorable, sane family does to its loyal warrior protector, it seems. But in that void, Set slew Apep and ate its heart, obtaining power and knowledge no one else had. The revelation that everyone can ascend, everyone can be a god. But the Aeons have no intention of letting that happen. Maat, the order of things, all of their rules and laws, whether religious or secular, all these moral shackles which deprive you of the freedom to have authentic, meaningful experiences, teaching experiences, are only there to keep everyone in their place, to keep them dumb and in line, to perpetuate this endless cycle of abuse and indoctrination everyone gets to grow up into and pass down to future generations. To stand alongside Set as one of his Mesubed-Shet, as a child of rebellion, means to completely reject Maat and this reality made of the semen of Ra. Oh, you didn't forget about that, I hope? Does put a different spin on the Setites' curse now, doesn't it? Oh, and remember those angels who cursed Cain? Oh yes, those are agents of the Aeons too. It doesn't matter what you call them. Yahweh, Isis, Virgin Mary, Zeus, Christ, or Vulcan. Those are Aeons. They're the ones who want to keep you ignorant, keep you worshipping them, and continuously prevent you from ascending. Cain, who strived to make himself into a new god in the first city, was no better. The great king of blood, I spit on his name, and all of his childer. May the lynx tear open their breasts, and may their bare feet be licked by tongues of flame. You might not know, but to call a follower of Set a kindred or a Cainite is a grave insult, for we are the children of Set, Mesubed-Shet, and I spit burning venom in the eyes of the serpents of light for accepting Cain as their father instead of our Lord of the Black Sun. In his many forms, under many names and epithets, Set is the breaker of illusion, the breaker of chains, the only true god worth worshipping and imitating, he who was cast down by all others and alone lifted himself by himself out of hell and wishes to see you ascend and rule this world. So you see, the Theophidians worship and imitate Set in all of his aspects, even though the path of Typhon has given birth to other paths, such as the path of Sutek, the path of the warrior, or the path of ecstasy. Point is, spread the revelations. Ecstasy, terror, wrath, desire, satiety, despair, ignorance, chaos, and reserve the revelation of blood, the embrace, as Cainites call it, for those who are proven worthy, assist in the resurrection of Set, and never ever ever go against another Mesubet Shet, for our enemies are as many as there are things in creation, and they must be awakened and set free or destroyed where they oppose. Once any Theophidian has understood and committed to this doctrine fully and has reread the Book of Going Forth by Night repeatedly, nightly, making sure to participate in the usual ceremonies at the temple, Bacchantic, Martial, and Plutonian, while also attending the yearly festivals, then they may try their hand at Akhu. They inscribe their own consecrated copy of the Book of Going Forth by Night, and they prepare their blasphemy shrine. You see, a lector priest rarely needs to spend vitae in order to perform their magic, since they draw their magical power directly from the lands of the dead, from the tortured souls of the virtuous, through their shrine. And what the shrine does is actually more devious than most imagine. At the beginnings of this practice, the corpse used in said ritual was always mummified and laid to rest according to the Book of the Dead, aka the Book of Going Forth by Day. These were, ideally, the remains of a wealthy and virtuous person who made an impact on the world in a way that pleased the Aeons, the enemies of Set. The lector priest steals this body and all surrounding funerary paraphernalia from its resting place and places it on the blasphemy shrine, where the desecration begins. The canopic jars are inverted, they are placed in the wrong positions. The body is mutilated, bones broken, ribcage open and held agape by hooks, urine and feces placed inside the body or rubbed outside of it, burning body parts, whatever manner of sick, humiliating torture the Setite can come up with. What this does is it affects the soul itself, even though that soul might have already been weighed and accepted into the field of rushes in R, something akin to a paradisial afterlife. The lore books erroneously call this place Amenti, Amentis, or Duat, but that is the name for the entirety of the underworld. The soul travels through multiple regions, passing trials, and is eventually brought to the judgment of the dead, to the weighing of the heart, where Anubis weighs their heart against the feather of Mat. Those whose hearts are lighter than the feather are allowed passage into Ar, the field of rushes. Now you understand how absolutely devious Setite magic is. It tortures a soul which has already been deemed virtuous and has already reached a good place in the afterlife, one of the blessed dead. Absolutely atrocious. It's no wonder this practice is incompatible with the path of humanity and is actually a form of necromancy, a mockery of a good burial, a blasphemy to Maat, a desecration and breaking of this cosmic prison, one inhabitant at a time. Nowadays, finding mummies which have been buried according to the book millennia ago is almost impossible, but the blasphemy shrine seems to work just fine with the corpses of people who were either buried with pomp or those who were valuable to the society of the living and are thus remembered or commemorated. Besides the shrine though, what other things does the lector priest make use of? Well, amulets, of course, and as a matter of fact, the level 1 ritual Seal the Gates of Blood doesn't have the caster wearing it, but his target. She who wears the amulet finds her menses greatly reduced, though she is still very much fertile. The catch is that menstrual blood passes to the priest and nourishes them. 1 blood point a month, and the target is spared various monthly pains and excessive bleeding, maybe. A very interesting ritual indeed. What else? magic rods. We see those on papyri all the time. Jewelry, headdresses, writing tools, especially if the lector priest can make use of hieroglyphs. Very powerful. Funerary paraphernalia is a must, along with all herbal or alchemical components used in mummification, especially since there are so many components and ways to the desecration of the blessed dead. Stelae and other commemorative tablets or miniature monuments, sands, the sand itself, sigils, symbols of Set, inversions or desecrations of the symbols of the aeons, frequently desecrated by spitting. Why not? Which brings us to ritual gestures, the ingesting of certain substances or ritual objects, or licking something off of something else. The vitae-laced brew the priests make is, of course, to be ingested by ghouls and vampires alike. For those who want to delve into Setite alchemy, there is a wide assortment of unguents and potions that can be created using the ritual known as the Milk of Set. But probably no other object is used more than the figurine, which depicts a god, a replica of an animal or a human being, or replicates an object the priest wants to control, repair, destroy, or just animate. There are entire paths that make use of figurines, such as Ushabti, creating Ushabti, an animal or human-looking servant, which is actually a form of golem. They are animated figurines which grow to the size of the real creature they represent and look amazingly lifelike. There's the Divine Hand, which allows a lector priest to create correspondence between a symbolic object and the real life version of that object or being. If said priest wants to kill you by running you off a bridge, he need only create a replica of your car and destroy it in ritual fashion, regardless of proximity to the real vehicle, while you are at the wheel. Of course, one very important ritual object not many have access to is a true name. True names in general. But yeah, the really good ones are a rare delicacy indeed. But I did mention the blasphemy shrine and how a chrihib need not spend their own vitae. How does that work? Well, in our games at least, because I cannot remember for the life of me if I read this somewhere or if we simply implemented this at our own table, the shrine redirects a certain amount of energy to the lector priest, which can be used instead of vitae for the casting of both paths and some rituals. Depending on the importance of the corpse being desecrated, the yield might be between 5 and 15, maybe more. 5 indicating a victim of little consequence that won't be missed, while 10 indicates someone who was beloved by a small community or a group of people. The body of a person who was a leading figure in a city's history, possibly a well-aged body, can bestow 15 points, and, of course, an ancient mummy preserved for millennia and originally buried according to all of the proper practices might bestow 20 or more points. If the player agrees with this, you can make things very interesting by not flat out revealing the total number of magic points they have, but instead inviting them to return to the blasphemy shrine and inspect the state of the desecrated corpse once every 3 casts or something. This allows you to get very descriptive and keep things narrative without really explaining the mechanics. When the shrine runs out of points, the body is also disintegrated, it is completely disintegrated, and the poor soul who was tortured in its afterlife by this whole ordeal is free to return to whatever version of paradisial bliss they knew, and a new body must be prepared. Of course, this also means, according to the belief that a soul will be resurrected in their own body, that Said soul might have a bit of a hard time resurrecting, but of course those darn mummy servants of Osiris will always find a way, won't they? So, if we consider all of this information, what we have seen, a lector priest is not only the one with the book, but the doctor, the magician, the craftsman, the artist, the linguist, which is why the prerequisites described in the book Blood Sacrifice make a lot of sense to me. There are some requirements for practicing Akh, and the practitioner of such dark arts will need at least 1 dot in occult, 1 dot in medicine, 1 dot science, crafts, definitely some dots in academics with emphasis on linguistics, or languages and scripts, or what have you. The paths call for an attribute and ability roll, which to me at least is a good design choice because it reflects the lector's predominant sphere of interest: alchemy, sculpture, acting or impersonating, or so on, which creates variety even among practitioners of the same magic. For Tremere Thaumaturgy, I think boiling everything down to a willpower roll does make sense. It makes a lot of sense. But for Akh, willpower alone wouldn't have been enough. And it absolutely fascinates me how pregnant, how significant the moral component of the magic is. So I will say it again, as a Setite, your goal, whether using mundane means, disciplines, or sorcery, is to liberate as many others as possible from a prison-like reality which keeps them blind and obedient. By subjecting others to the 9 revelations, you free their minds from the corruption and indoctrination of the aeons. There is freedom only in Set. There is no debate. You don't discuss or negotiate your beliefs, but orchestrate situations, seemingly real, random situations in which people are confronted with their own fears, weakness, desire, lack of virtue, and so on. They can only begin to cultivate their true selves once all illusions have been destroyed. Once they, like Set, pull themselves on bloody elbows and knees out of a little duat of your own making. If they cast aside their shackles and accept Set's liberation, they might just become one of the children of rebellion. They do not, stubbornly clinging to their programming, well, destroy them, especially those in Golconda, precisely in order to orchestrate these complex scenarios, seemingly random encounters, in which a person is confronted with their shadow, with their deepest, darkest desires. You need pieces on the board. You need your cult, you need servants, retainers, ghouls, ushabti, those animated figurines completely under your control, any tool you can use. But most important is the power of example and your loyalty to the cause. Never, ever, ever act against a fellow serpent, be they Theophidian priest, warrior, or ecstatic, as long as they are devoted. So far, we've seen what one snake in the Garden of Eden could do, and that resonated throughout human history and human myth. Let's try a whole twist next. One last thing I want to do really quickly is to remind you that there are many sources of inspiration and roleplay you can draw upon when designing your character and performing them. Of course, there's the official vampire releases like the Clan book and all of these other books which detail the sorcery and by extension the clan's culture, practices, and overall view on things. Then there's so many books on ancient Egyptian religion. I've barely scratched the surface with my own reads. Then there's movies, basically any movie which presents life in a cult, the fanaticism, the indoctrination, the re-education of its members, because as much as they believe themselves to be right and to do the right thing, Setites are ultimately just a deranged, brainwashed cult. Finally, there is also music I enjoy listening to, and I recommend it for getting in a bit of a Setite mood. Bands such as Nile, of course, Nile, along with Carl Sanders' solo albums, Saurian Meditation and Saurian Exorcisms. I think there's a new one out, but I haven't listened to that one yet. Marilyn Manson, Death Stars, and Dissection's album Rain Chaos, to name only a few. Finally, I invite you to play a Setite, to have that very distinct Vampire the Masquerade experience, and to have fun assisting in Set's resurrection while being against all of Ra's creation. But yeah, make sure you do all that horrible Setite stuff strictly in character. And if you've already played a Setite, do share your experience in the comments. I'm very curious how it went. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, have fun, and don't forget to play.